Welcome to Catalyst Energies. My name is Dee. Thank you for joining me. I am so grateful that you are here. Welcome, Pisces, to your full moon forecast. In this report, we're going to go over the main astrological themes for our Pisces full moon up to our next new moon in September, which is going to be in the sign of Virgo. So this forecast is directed at the Pisces sun, moon, and rising folks. We are going to be looking at the Pisces rising chart in this forecast. Some of you may be aware that there's a little bit of a difference in terms of other past videos. I am not on camera. I actually had some equipment issues that are making that a little difficult, so we're going with straight audio for this forecast. But I do have the chart up if you are wanting to look at the chart as I explain things. And I have some other imagery to share with you. We're going to talk about the Draco constellation and Alpha Draconis because the sun is conjunct Alpha Draconis at this full moon. So we're going to talk about that in terms of fixed star astrology, ancient astrology, talk a bit about the Draco Starseed resonance and frequency, right? The signature of the Draco Starseed, help to demystify galactic astrology a little bit, kind of separate it out from the fundamentally anti-human perspective of my soul's not really from here, and try to turn the focus on starseed and galactic astrology, at least from my vantage point and perspective, towards how we can use it as fundamentally humans in this vessel, in this lifetime, and how the galactic astrology functions just like the natal chart in terms of the resonance and frequency of light coming from these fixed stars has an impact on us at the time and place we were born, just like the rest of the astrology chart. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. Saturn is in your sign, Pisces, and will continue to be here for a while longer, at least the next couple of years. It's going to retrograde back to 0 degrees Pisces and then station direct. So it's not leaving Pisces at this point until it fully ingresses out of the sign into Aries. And that's going to be more into 2025, 2026. So I'm going to talk about the fixed star Fomalhaut a little bit because this is where Saturn is conjunct right now, and of course the imagery of the full moon itself, and then just go into the main themes moving through the next 2 weeks, focusing in on the third quarter moon, which will be in the 4th house for Pisces, and just get into the general themes, what the Pisces person may be dealing with, maybe living through right now, and what this full moon is revealing. So it is a full super moon, meaning that the moon is at its perigee, it's at its point of its orbit that is closest to the planet, whereas the apogee is the point of the lunar orbit that is furthest from the planet. This is where Black Moon Lilith is. Black Moon Lilith in astrology is not a planet or an object. It is a space. It is a void. And so this is also where the sun is pretty much conjunct to this as well, as it is lined up with Alpha Draconis. So there is some interesting energy associated with this. But the full moon is a super moon, which means that the waters of our own soul, our living soul, which is what the moon represents, is so... it's just so much more enhanced right now. And so for the Pisces person, I mean, you're definitely feeling it more so, obviously, than anyone else being a Pisces person. Saturn in your sign, I think, has been a mixed blessing. It's been very difficult. It's been, for some people, a very necessary anchor. And for other people, it has been a very isolating and restricting and very depressing influence, because the Pisces person is so much more familiar with and identified with the lack of boundary, the lack of limitation, to just seamlessly blend in with everything around, even the collective unconscious. But Saturn here continues to be the anchor that is probably necessary for the Pisces person to not just have everything blend in or bleed over into the individual's experience. And in fact, with all this Virgo energy, with Mercury now retrograde, obviously the sun is in Virgo. Black Moon Lilith is oscillating. The true Lilith is oscillating out of Virgo into Leo and then back into Virgo. It's really just like when we do any of the full moon forecasts, the sign opposite of that person has to, or that sign has to do with who you are in relationship. And out of all the signs with, Pisces, there is no boundary between you and other more often than not. But it is essential that you establish that boundary in a very, although mutable, right? Virgo is mutable earth. There is malleability, there is adaptability. That is something that the Pisces person is so capable of, but there needs to be boundaries here. There needs to be organization. There needs to be differentiation between you and other. And Mercury retrograde right now is going to be this opportunity, I think, for the Pisces people to really digest and process the information about who you are in relationship and what you are learning by being in whatever type of relationship, whether it's personal or professional, spiritual, whatever it is. It's the relationship that brings out the much more organized and very human part of you, right? The aspect that is very much has a root system in the ground, in the objective world, because it's very easy for the Pisces person to just float off into fantasy land because of all this very imaginative, compassionate, forgiving, unconditionally loving, right? This is the Christ energy in Pisces. And oftentimes Pisces sun people in particular will tend to be people who are like generals and admirals who are born into an expression of giving themselves entirely. But it's not about being a martyr. It is about being a vessel, right? A perfect vessel. And Virgo is Jesus or Yeshua, the person, the human, right? That is what made his ministry so profoundly powerful, is because he was able to blend these two aspects of spirituality and materiality into one vessel. And Pisces, if this is the work for you right here. Now, like I said, Saturn has been very difficult, I think, for the Pisces people because it's been limiting, restricting, very somber, very depressing, right? It's forcing boundaries and limitations in your very essence, in your very identity, in how you express yourself, which has, for the most part, there is no boundary when it comes to you. Now, Neptune has been in your sign for years now. And so every time there's a retrograde, there is a clearing of the fog. There's a wiping of the film off of the screen so that there is a much clearer view of the transcendental aspects of who you are, which is very valuable right now. It's the Saturn aspect that has been, I think, very difficult, but very, very necessary. So we're going to talk about the conjunction with Saturn and the moon. We're going to talk about the imagery of the full moon itself. Talk a little bit about Draco, the Draco constellation, Alpha Draconis, because that's where the sun is, and then look at the main themes going through the next 2 weeks, right? A full moon is a beginning, but in consciousness, right? Something revealed to our objective conscious self that needs to be intentionally applied now, whereas the new moon is a beginning in unconsciousness. And where did the new moon start for the Pisces rising person? It was in the 6th house in Leo, right? And Venus is actually going to station direct by the end of this upcoming weekend, Sunday. And so, holding back the voice, right? Holding back our creative expression. It's been very difficult. And the 6th house is where we get our shit together. The 6th house is where we mature, where we ripen, where our works and labors are really dedicated to something more than ourselves, but it's still about what we are doing to reconstitute and perfect ourselves. And it comes through some sort of discipline. And I think the biggest challenge for a Pisces person is to connect into their authentic voice, their soul's voice. Because as a Pisces person, you are just basically connecting into all that there is, which is beautiful and inspiring and imaginative and artistic, right? But it also is, quite delusional and fantasy driven and dreamy and just very nebulous and amorphous. And if you aren't clear about who you are in relation to other, then you are just opening yourself up and staying open to whatever influences cross that membrane, right? You need to be semi-permeable membrane in your identity, Pisces. So the 6th house is where that new moon started in Leo, right? Is your voice authentic? Is your heart's desire and passion so strong that you are not disturbed out of your dedication, your discipline, whatever that process in the 6th house is? That was the beginning of this lunar cycle. Now the full moon is revealing, right, in terms of how you're identified in your relationships, if in fact you are hearing the call. And if you are, simultaneously being summoned and being the summoner, right? And this has a lot to do, I think, with this conjunction with Saturn, which on the outside, especially if you're not stable, and as a Pisces person, you don't have this sense of identity in relation to everything that you are in relationship with. If there is a lack of stability here, this conjunction with Saturn and the moon that's happening leading up to the full moon can be very difficult. There can be rejection and isolation because emotional connection can be very difficult. But the thing again is that Mercury in its retrograde in Virgo, in the sign opposite of you, there is a lot of inner processing about who you are and who you've been in relationship and what that means for you. So it depends on whose dance steps you are really identified with. Are you identified with your own sense of connection to source, right? Or are you part of a cultural standard in your relationship that is having you follow someone else's format? In which case the full moon again will really illuminate for the Pisces person if in fact you are hearing the call of the divine and ready to also sound the call, or if you've been pulled into some other agenda that really is not in alignment with you at all. So let's start here by talking about Saturn and the moon in its conjunction and just kind of unpack that a little bit, because really Saturn is in conjunction with this full moon itself. So, and the imagery of 4 degrees Pisces in terms of Sabian symbols is really relevant to where this hurricane is landing, and there's something really, really powerful about this. And I really want to bring it up, even if you're not there, even if it has no influence on your life whatsoever. There's something there energetically that is relative and relevant to the Pisces person. So when the moon is in conjunction with Saturn, in general, right, it really has a somber influence, but also leads your emotional state to be more sensible and realistic, okay? You feel more responsible for people, your loved ones, and the people who depend on you, right? So the moon does represent, not only our inner life, our emotional landscape, but it also represents those relationships that we value, our personal life, right? So you intuitively will know what to do in a crisis when moon conjuncts Saturn, okay? I want you to put a pin in that for a minute. Carrying out tasks bring emotional satisfaction, right? When you are doing what you need to do to be responsible, you emotionally feel that. But if you're unstable, this can be a very emotionally trying time when Moon and Saturn are conjunct, because it forces that realism, that sensibility, that somberness. And it does not allow for that escapism in terms of your own fantasy about yourself as a Pisces person at all. So sometimes the efforts to connect emotionally, which is what the moon allows us to do, can be met with rejection, because again, there's limitation and restriction with Saturn as well. And the imagery of 4 degrees Pisces, not only is it conjunct Fomalhaut, which is one of the royal fixed stars related to Archangel Gabriel, it is also Sabian symbol wise an isthmus. And is Florida not an isthmus, right? Where you have a very narrow band of land that is surrounded by the expanse of the ocean. And the ocean is often related to the sign of Pisces, right? It is the formless, undifferentiated source of all of our life, right? So, and that we ourselves are a drop of water, but indistinguishable from the whole, right? That is what Pisces represent, which is why Pisces people are either often very in service, fully giving themselves in service to their community or humanity, or they tend to be incredibly artistic and creative and imaginative because they are often inspired by the muse very easily, right? So it's important to learn from your past mistakes here. And the retrograde of Saturn, I think, is really important, as well as the retrograde of Mercury during this time, because I think that this is one of those moments to really bring that realism and sensibility to emotions, and certainly to the sense of self in relation to this, but also to give an opportunity to really learn from past mistakes, to really digest and process the information that you have been collecting about who you are in your relationships, to maybe make different decisions, perhaps even reprogram the way that you interact with the world, right? Now, the isthmus of 4 degrees Pisces, like I said, is striking, considering that there is a massive storm that is hitting the isthmus of Florida right now as this full moon is happening. So, and there was a big storm here last night. I mean, I don't live near Florida, but there was still a big storm last night. So the water, being inundated with the water with this super full moon in a water sign is pretty it's pretty striking to me. And then you have the Saturn aspect, right? The limitation is that there is this narrow band, right? There is this band of land that needs to be clear of obstruction in order to get what? The direct transmission from the divine messenger, which is Archangel Gabriel. And Archangel Gabriel is the watcher of the south and is connected to the fixed star of Fomalhaut. So if I were to show you actually here, if we just look at the image of the constellation of the southern fish, Pisces Astrinus, not Pisces, the two fish, but Pisces Astrinus, Fomalhaut is in the mouth of the fish. And if you pan out and look at the constellations around it, you see that Aquarius, the water bearer, is dumping the jug of water, and the stream of water is flowing right into the mouth of the fish. There is something here about the direct line of divine transmission that we receive when we are truly ready to receive it. And that's what Fomalhaut, I feel like, really represents. Yes, the fish is in the water, right? The medium is all the same according to the fish, but there is in fact a stream that is flowing into this particular fish, right? The Pisces Astrinus, and Fomalhaut is the fixed star at the mouth. So there is a lesson here, or at the very least, there is a transmission that is being provided through this conjunction with Saturn, even as difficult as it may be in this situation, especially, like I said, if there's some instability. But along with the Mercury retrograde now, and Uranus retrograde in the third house, right? This is usually the territory of something like Mercury. This is situational awareness. This is assessment of your environment, which is through your cognition, through your neurological systems, through your ability to perceive what's going on around you. And with Uranus stationing retrograde, there's been a flipping of the script. There's been a sudden jolt or change in this area. Maybe there has been an equipment malfunction in terms of the way you communicate or the mechanisms in which you are moving back and forth. That could very well be the case for many Pisces people. And Mercury, more of the individual consciousness in its home sign of Virgo in its retrograde. There's a lot of digesting and inner processing and going back over and analyzing information about who you've been in relationship and who you want to be. And this full moon is illuminating that, right? Are you hearing the call? Are you receiving the divine transmission into your very selfhood? Is it something that you are then able to turn around and be able to offer or to sound the call with the full moon? It really depends on what dance steps you are really following in terms of relationship. Now, this can be personal relationship, professional relationship, the social contract, your spiritual relationship to the Great Spirit or God, however you conceptualize that for yourself. This is a great segue into some imagery around Alpha Draconis, because this is where the sun is conjunct at this full moon, including at the lunar apogee, which is Black Moon Lilith. So there's a lot of very dark, very shadowy, very intense energy with the sun as well. So let's look a little bit at the Draco constellation and Alpha Draconis in as a star, and just kind of unpack this a little bit so you can see even if it's difficult, and even if you're having a very difficult time with what you are feeling, with how you are, what is being revealed to you about yourself, how you express yourself, how you project yourself into the world, realize that there is a lesson here. There's an opportunity with this full moon to reorient yourself based on your relationships. Because the thing about a Pisces person, and I will say it many times over, and I'm sure I've already said it once, is that there are no boundaries for the Pisces person. And so you just take on everything, right? And you become martyred in a lot of ways. Virgo, as the sign opposite you, and especially in your 7th house, really drawing the energy towards who are you in relationship, because that is a human person. Virgo is Jesus or Yeshua as the person, right? Christ was the Pisces energy. And so Pisces identified people are very identified with that oneness, with that seamless connection to all there is. But you are here in a human vessel. And Virgo is about that human vessel and that human experience, and is about discrimination. And not in the way that we have been taught, but in a way of analysis and intuition, that there's a blending of duality, but not a dissolving of the duality. And you have to know the difference between you and other in any relationship you're in, and what your service is to that relationship, so you can fully realize yourself without martyring yourself. Now, Thuban or Alpha Draconis is a star in the tail of the Draco constellation, the dragon, okay? So when we look at some basic fixed star astrology, when it comes to Alpha Draconis or Thuban, there are a couple of common threads here. So number one, Thuban was the pole star like 3,000 years ago, just like Polaris is the pole star now. Thuban was the pole star 3,000 years ago, and there is a shaft from the bottom of the central passage of one of the Great Pyramids to Thuban. So it really designated that pole star, that orientation. So when you have this star in your chart, Draco's starseed energy aside, it shows a depth of character, artistic skills, passion for the arts. You can see how the connection with Pisces and Virgo brings this together. So living a life where your talents are regularly seen and heard is a pathway that is offered. It is not saying for sure, it is offered here. So things like singing and writing, general leadership, preaching in some ways, right? The ministry of Jesus was him as a human, right? These are all very promising when you have this in your chart, okay? Thuban does also indicate a hard time with family. So situations where a lack of understanding and compromise can often spoil the mood for reconciliation, right? So then you got this perfectionist aspect of Virgo that is never satisfied, that is always trying to be more perfect, trying to be more disciplined, right? Getting to getting hyper fixated on the perfection, which then again spoils the mood because there's no lack of understanding, there's no compromise, there's no sense of the mutability of Virgo in some ways. So remember, Virgo is mutable, malleable, adaptable. It may be physical and material because it's an earth sign, but there are changes that can be made, right? Virgo is when the root system is working, right? There is a change in the physicality based on the work of the root system. But with patience, these connections can grow even because of the complications. It kind of forces that normal sixth house type of got to get your shit together because you can't actually avoid these complications. You grow as a result of them. So on the shadow side of this energy, especially if we use it negatively to control people or manipulate people, it will backfire. This is the dark side of the Draco energy, okay? And people with Draco starseed energy have to be very aware of this potential and be just honest with themselves about it. So if our intentions are not honest and forthcoming, we can get angry. There are mistakes, there are broken promises, right? So you have to handle things calmly and with gratitude when you have Draco in your chart somewhere. So remind yourself the universe is testing you. And I would say that is especially the issue right now, Pisces, because of Saturn, the conjunction with the Pisces moon and Saturn, and then the full super moon opposite Draco, okay? That there is a test, a universal test happening right now. So oftentimes we get caught in a pattern over forces which we have no control and are restless for change. And I would say if we go back to the astrology chart, if you are in fact looking at the chart itself, you see that Uranus in your third house stationing retrograde is definitely those things that we can't control. So again, Pisces, about your mind, about your mental faculties, about the ways that you communicate, that you interface with information, either learning it or communicating it or processing it or observing, how you get back and forth to places is third house. How you assess your environment through your perception. Your perception changes when Uranus comes in. It's just like, I'm going to flip the script now, and everything changes. So we're restless for the change, maybe. Maybe we're just feeling it very drastically. We have no control over it right in front of us. I would say again, Pisces, that this is most likely part of what you are dealing with. No control and having restlessness about the change or for the change. And I would say because of the retrograde of Uranus in particular, that this is about having no control over the change. This energy is best focused on analyzing the current situation. Boy, if there was ever a Virgo word, it is analysis, right? Crunch the numbers, right? This is something a Pisces person doesn't necessarily want to do unless they are very tapped into their dipole of Virgo. Travel opportunities and finances are favored, right? This is more mundane astrology when it comes to Alpha Draconis. Don't be a slave to the addiction of emotional highs and lows, since this will isolate and divide. Oh, that's a big one. And I would say that is very relative to Alpha Draconis in general. Show some restraint. Know when the appropriate time to act. Patience is a virtue. It's not just a catchy cliche phrase. It is related to Virgo. And so what is being revealed at the full moon, and remember, the full moon will be present for a number of days after the exact full moon. So just know that this revelation comes and sits with us for a number of days until the moon gets closer into the third quarter, which we're going to go into. But this Alpha Draconis energy is very, very present. Now, in terms of Draco Starseed, all I'm going to really say about that is that all of those things I just kind of detailed when it comes to Draco and Alpha Draconis applies to the Draco Starseed. It applies to having this signature in your chart. And so the frequency of that particular fixed star comes through the solar system. It interacts with the planets in your natal chart, for instance, and then has an influence on you. And so the Draco starseeds have a huge responsibility. They're either tapped into the original Draco line, which is the dragon energy that is indigenous to here, this realm, being very much part of the earth realm, right? We're talking about Virgo, but the corruption of this energy is very reptilian in all of the negative reptilian ways. And this is not about your soul being reptilian or your soul being from Alpha Draconis, but this has an influence on your soul at the architectural and blueprint level energetically. So again, you have to be mindful of this energy so that you, especially if you're a Pisces identified person, boy, I mean, talk about just getting pulled into someone else's agenda, not realizing that that is what's happening. I think that if you're a Pisces identified person and you do have Draco somewhere in your chart, you really have to be very, very meticulous and mindful about who you are. And especially with this new moon in Leo in your 6th house, which is the Virgo house, right? The house where we have to get our shit together. We have to get organized. We have to be disciplined. We have to do the things that we know are going to purify our vessel in order to be a full service to not only humanity, but to God's plan for us. So, and you can identify that however you want. You don't have to say that it's God or not God. It is about identifying a creative source that is the source of all. And as a Pisces person, that is something that you inherently just embody, because that's what Pisces represents, is our connection to all there is. So, but if you don't get down to reality of the root system that is working under the surface, then you just get pulled into the reptilian agenda, right? And this is a big part of this full moon in general, right? And when we had that first quarter moon in Sagittarius, it was, can you see the forest for the trees and still execute patience? Or are you going to allow that spark of struggle, which is important when it comes to Sagittarius, right? That is the alchemical fire of Sagittarius. But if it is, again, being utilized for someone else's agenda, then our alchemical fire gets utilized for something else. And I think that it's very easy, again, to get pulled into all of these things. And we're getting at that next level here of deception and the spiritual warfare. And this full moon, I think, is a blessing, as difficult as it's going to be for people to be like, oh, this is the spiritual warfare. So Pisces, it's all coming out in your relationships, who you are in relationships, how you identify with your relationships. And Mercury in its retrograde, really digesting what you've learned so far about who you are in relationships. So that's the Draco aspect. That is Fomalhaut, Archangel Gabriel in terms of Saturn. And remember, Saturn's going to come back here in its direct motion. So keep in mind that it's really more of a magnetic quality pulling into the identity right now and can seem very heavy. But the other thing about that is that it's pulling the message directly from source into your sense of identity right now. And that might be depressing or isolating, or you feel rejected. But so what, right? We all go through that at some point, Pisces, and realize that the only real connection that truly matters as you as a Pisces is your connection to your creator or to God or to source, okay? So take it for what it is and learn as much as you can right now. So the other thing that is really present in terms of all this general energy is that Mars is now in Libra. Now, Mars is a detriment in Libra. It is in the sign opposite of its home, which is the 2nd house for you Pisces, but it also is in a house that it actually likes to be in, which is the 8th house for the Pisces rising. So Libra is about peace, equilibrium, justice, fairness. It is about balanced relationship as a whole, right? And is very Saturnian in its own way, because you have to have physical material aspects to balance, and there's only 2 sides to the scale. And so it does require us to transfigure and reconstruct ourselves in the face of imbalance, right? So Mars is much more of a diplomat than a warrior when it comes into Libra, which is very difficult. But for you, Pisces, Mars coming into your eighth house about shared resources. And now keep in mind that the South Node is coming into conjunction with Arcturus in your eighth house. So remember that the South Node is where we've been at a soul level, the tail of the dragon. Alpha Draconis, right? Thuban is in the tail of the dragon. The nodes of the moon are inspired by the Draco constellation. The South Node or descending node is the tail, which is the momentum pushing us out of where we've been. So yes, Mars is coming into your eighth house and really puts a lot of that initiative and action towards inspiring and arousing the people that you are in relationship with and the resources, right? The power dynamics. So you can find yourself really getting, kind of stepping into that leadership position, but more of a diplomat. Here's the thing, without this sense of what is your resource, what you share and what you inspire people in terms of what you're sharing doesn't mean as much if you don't know what your resources actually are, which is the second house. And for Pisces, what is your resource? It's your creative potential. It's your unique signature of identity and subjective I am as a resource, right? It's one thing as a Pisces person to be, formless and undifferentiated and completely plugged in, seamlessly connected to all there is, which allows you to really tap into people, be very empathic, be very sympathetic, be very compassionate and artistic. But without the resource of your creative, unique potential, the spark of divinity as your resource, what are you actually inspiring people in terms of sharing, right? You're just kind of getting out there and getting people, again, this goes back to whose dance steps are you following, right? What cultural traditions and standards are you identifying with right now in relationship? Because that's going to have a big influence on what you personally and subjectively instinctually project yourself into in terms of this shared experience. And it's going to get really interesting as Mars and the South Node come into conjunction on October 4th, conjunct Arcturus. Okay, so that's something else we'll talk about in different venues when we get there. But for the Pisces person, you have Chiron and the North Node, the ascending node, the head of the dragon in your second house. This really suggests to me that the focus and the underlying drives are what is your resource, right? And, Mars rules this sign. So as long as you are being aware of and being very honest about where your wounds are in this area, which is I am that I am, right? I am, and that's enough, right? Pisces people, I think that it can be very difficult to be like, well, I don't matter. It's all about what I can give into service of humanity. Well, that's not going to matter if you don't get a sense of, what is your resource? What is inherently yours to utilize and to be very realistic about what it is you can hold and what it is that you may drop if you try to hold too much, because Mars, at least Mars is slowing its roll for the first time since it was in Taurus. My gosh, it's just been going full speed ahead while everything else has been retrograde. So coming into Libra has been kind of like, okay, the projection of the individual identity is an action is in the area of how do we balance these relationships. And for the Pisces person, it's in the place where we need a lot of balance, which is in the dark areas, in the power dynamics, in the occult areas that are hidden, because that's what the eighth house is, your own subconscious, okay? Now, you can get people all inspired and aroused and really kind of step forward in some sort of leadership position in this area, but without an awareness of where you get caught up in your victim savior mentality, right? Victim savior, martyr savior. If you are not being honest with yourself about how your resources are funneling through Chiron right now, you could be very off base with where you're projecting yourself and how you are projecting yourself in terms of shared resources, right? I think just be mindful of this, Pisces. So much of this forecast is really about the Pisces person being very clear with who they actually are and where that connection actually is to. Because if you are pulled into, like I said, what cultural standards are you identified with? Are you connected into the dragon energy that is inherently powerful and part of this realm, or are you part of the corrupted program that is more reptilian, which is very selfish, which is very power hungry, right? Which is not into humanity at all. It's going to make a difference in terms of where you're putting yourself and giving yourself over to. So this second house is really important in terms of Mars projecting itself out into shared resource land. So that's something to pay attention to. It's going to be ongoing for weeks and months, really. And October 4th, when the EBS is scheduled, that nationwide, it's going to be when Mars and the South Node are conjunct Arcturus. It's going to be really, really interesting. So now let's start looking at the play-by-play here. The first real big transit is going to be Venus stationing direct on the 3rd. So the moon is moving through the first 3 houses, which is where everything will be retrograde for the Pisces person come the end of even this week, because Jupiter will be retrograde as well. So the moon is going through all of these areas that are retrograde, these large transpersonal planets that are in the areas of subjective, objective, and assessment of the individual. So there's going to be a lot of pulling this larger transpersonal energy into those experience, Pisces, which again is going to kind of force in some ways a reevaluation of who you are and what you're up to. So, but on the 3rd is where Venus is going to station direct in Leo. And I think this is going to be a really nice, for the 6th house, especially for the Pisces rising, Venus stationing direct, I feel like the meaning of the challenges is going to be softened. There's going to be kind of this warm glow of hope. It's going to be like, the meaning of the challenges is becoming so much more palpable to you, right? And to what you are doing in terms of your disciplines, your self-care, your practices, your dedication, your service, your works and labors. And Venus, even with the retrogrades that are going to be happening in that 3rd house of Taurus, which is what Venus rules for you, there's going to be this sense of retrospect of like, I see now. There's going to be much broader, meaningful perspective. Doesn't mean there won't be more challenges. There definitely will, with Uranus retrograde in your 3rd, Jupiter about to retrograde in your 3rd, and even the moon coming through the 3rd house at this time, giving you an opportunity to pick up on things pattern-wise that you wouldn't normally be able to as much with your mind or with other attributes, right? So you intuitively are picking up on, subconsciously picking up on patterns that you otherwise wouldn't be picking up on. And then Venus stations direct and you're like, oh. And it gives a sense of value and purpose and meaning to the challenges. And because that's what happens in the 6th house. It's always some sort of personal crisis, a healing crisis, or some other challenging situation that forces you to get your shit together, okay? And for the Pisces person, it means about your heart, your passion, your creative expression, okay? So yes, there are going to be challenges in terms of your perception and your mind and the way that this is organized, but the way that you put it into action or put it to work is going to there's going to be a much kind of like softening of the edges, and the glow of your heart, the radiation of your own heart and your authenticity in your voice is going to be part of like the softening in some ways. It's going to create like a barrier in terms of the challenges. It's not going to take them away, but it's at least going to create some sense of like, okay, this is this, I see the meaning of this now, right? And then you have Mercury that is going to trine Jupiter as it's stationing on the 4th, which is the end, which is Monday, which is Labor Day here. And this is a great time to make plans. Jupiter and Mercury in a trine, great time to make plans. And especially when we're talking about retrograde energy here, I would say for sure this is a great opportunity to clean stuff up in your life, in your mind. Get your mind organized, get your means of communication organized. One of the best transits for making plans. And I would say instead of making plans, doing that type of research and study and really mentally cleaning things up as you are confronting some things in who you are in relationship that really need to be addressed, right? And take advantage of the retrograde Jupiter stationing to realize that how things have been, the things that you've relied upon in terms of your thought process and your traditions, they're not going to be able to confirm where things are going. But at the very least, you can confront where you've been and make a commitment to make change and to clean things up and to organize yourself in relationships. So this is going to be that Sunday into Monday is going to be very important for that time frame. So definitely take advantage of it. When we get to the 6th, which is our 3rd quarter moon, this is our ideological crisis, because the moon's going to come into your 4th house of Gemini. And not only be in a square to the sun, it's going to square Mercury. And Mercury and the sun are going to conjunct in a cazimi, right? And in Virgo. So this has got Mercury energy all over it because it's the moon in Gemini and the conjunction in Virgo with the sun and Mercury, and these are both signs that are ruled by Mercury. So when we have a 3rd quarter moon, the ideological crisis is where the idols are starting to get torn down, okay? And part of that issue here is a moon in the 4th house, right? You're really sensitive to your inner personal power and where it comes from, and very sensitive to and emotionally connected to your actual root system, which for the Pisces person is the capacity to consider all the alternatives, to really allow yourself to think very deeply, to find your root system in that place of all possibilities. Again, with a Pisces person, so mutable across experience that your real power comes from the polarity that allows for the consideration of all possibilities and the communication. So there might be some inner communication. There might be some deep, sensitive type of objective communication between yourself and your subconscious. It may be very deep conversations with people that are in your immediate life, like in your loved ones, your family, whatever it is. This degree of Gemini has a lot to do with the objective necessity of talking to each other, but it may be much more of a talking to yourself, but considering emotionally those options here and getting strength from that situation, because there's going to be aspects about where you've been and what standards culturally and otherwise that have anchored you in relationship that are going, you're going to have this kind of aha moment about with the Mercury in its retrograde. So as those idols are starting to tear down the ideological crisis, it's the moon in the 4th house, I think, for you Pisces, where you're going to actually find your real power in that moment, because it's going to be much deeper sense of considering the options, really putting what you feel to the test of rational and objective comparison, right? It's one thing to have a subjective experience, and yes, the moon in the 4th house is very sensitive to that. But in Gemini, it requires that you consider its opposition, and that's the real power. That's the real inner power of the Pisces person, is the consideration of all options. And so even as that Kazemi with the Sun and Mercury in your 7th house is just like this eye-opening, like, oh, these are the root systems that have been at work in my relationship, it's going to be the Moon that's going to be like, here, let's tear these down and consider some of the other options, right? Maybe it's time to transplant myself. Maybe it's time to spread my root system in a different direction. Maybe I just need to talk to somebody that I trust, that's right in my, that is a loved one or a family member, and compare experiences. Maybe there's an awareness of like, oh, this root system, this cultural standard, this root power that I had been really identified with in terms of relationship. Maybe the Mercury Kazemi in its retrograde is this aha moment about it that's like, whoa, this is a lot deeper than I thought. And maybe it will require a deeper objective conversation or consideration. But that's where your power is, Pisces. To consider all of the options, because they all are on the table as a Pisces person, because it represents everything and nothing. So that's the 6th, next Wednesday. And then, the transits really slow down after that. Once the Kazemi happens, there's one more big transit, which is the Sun comes into a trine with Jupiter, which is pretty favorable, I would say. And remember, Jupiter's retrograde, right? It's starting to, that inner expansion is the inner wealth, right? The inner resource and value is something that is going to be understood. It's more of like an inner standing. But when the Sun is in a trine to Jupiter, it brings growth and prosperity, optimism and enthusiasm. We become more confident and adventurous in terms of our outlook. Again, maybe this is about a new inner project and helps overcome setbacks. That seems to be one of the biggest things that is going to come out of this trine with Jupiter, is that there's personal inner growth that helps overcome the setbacks in not only what you're assessing in your immediate environment, but how you're identified with your relationships as well. And then the Moon comes into Cancer, which is very, very powerful, and then moves into Leo. And really, it's just the Moon transits until we get to the next new moon, which is on the 14th of September. It is, and of course, you see that September 11th is absolutely during this time. And this is when the Moon will be in your 6th house, Pisces. It'll conjunct Venus. It will be in the 6th house. It will obviously cross over in its balsamic phase to the new moon. And so whatever happens during this time, remember that it is the challenge and crisis in the 6th house where the new moon started that was challenging each of us. Can we stay in our own sense of authenticity? Is our heart strong, right? Or is our heart going to fail us in this moment? And I would say that this is a perfect opportunity to reconnect with that, Pisces, because it's in a house that is the most challenging for anybody. And then on the 13th into the 14th, we have a new moon in Virgo. And this is exceptionally important for 2 reasons. Number one, this is the same degree that Mercury stationed retrograde, the royal coat of arms, the breastplate of the king, right? The armor of God. This is where this new moon starts, right? This is a whole new role that you take on, Pisces, in terms of relationship, because you have accepted the royal coat of arms, which comes with its own responsibility. And this is where I'm going to make the recommendation for a book that might be worth reading in this situation. And also know that right after this is when Mercury stations direct, right after the next new moon. So there is a lot that's going to start moving forward, Pisces. You are going to change as a result of your relationship changes in the next 2 weeks for sure. And that's going to set you up for a whole new role in terms of your relationship, whether it be social, personal, or professional, right? And then Mercury in its home sign of Virgo is going to station direct and be like, yeah, I'm going to do it my way. And I'm going to do it my unique way based on everything that I've just learned. And I'm not going to just be an open vessel vessel for whoever and whatever wants to cross that membrane, right? It's going to be semi-permeable. I'm going to make the decision of what comes in and out, and I am hearing the voice and the message from divine source directly into my being, and that's going to influence how I approach relationship, okay? And what I would recommend in this instance, actually, if you haven't already, is a book called The Alchemist. It's very easy to get online. You can actually download it for free through Internet Archive if you want. It's a very easy read, but there's a lot of imagery in here that is relative to everything I just talked about and the upcoming new moon. So I would really suggest that as well. So Pisces, that's going to do it for your full moon forecast. Thank you so much for being here. I truly appreciate each and every one of you so very much. Take care of yourself, Pisces. Take care of each other the best you can, and I'll see you on the next forecast. Take care. Bye.